Hey guys, it's Kathleen, and today we are going to be discussing a recent release, aka Leah on the Offbeat by Becky Albertalli. Leah on the Offbeat, if you haven't heard about it yet, is the sequel to Simon vs. the Homo sapiens agenda, following the perspective of Leah Burke, who is Simon's best friend from the first book. The premise is that Leah is going through her senior year of high school, and she's trying to just live her life and figure out her future, but she hasn't told anyone, even Simon, that she's bisexual, and she starts falling for a member of her friend group, which starts to cause complications in her life. This book really didn't have any controversy surrounding it before it came out, and now it has plenty now that people have actually read it. I honestly thought I was going to love this book before I read it, and spoiler alert, I didn't. Just so you guys know, this is probably going to be a spoilery video. There's certain plot points in here that I feel I need to discuss, and I feel like they're hard to do without having spoiler. However, there are a couple things I will try to avoid. There are a few names I will try to avoid mentioning so that you're not totally unsurprised if you decide you want to read this book. So without further ado, let's discuss. I want to start by giving this book a quick shout out for what it does well. So overall, this is still a diverse story, as Becky Albertalli's books always are. Multiple LGBT characters in this story, including Leah. There's several characters of color. So those are good things about this book. And yes, this book is lighthearted and fluffy and kind of fun, I guess. So if that's all you're looking for in a book, then you know what, you can even maybe turn this review off. You might like it, but if you're looking for something else just like I was, then you might want to keep watching. Let's start off by discussing the plot of this book, namely the fact that there isn't one. This book follows Leah in her senior year of high school, and she's, you know, living her senior year. She's figuring who she should go to prom with. She's figuring out where she should go to university. She's going on a road trip to go to university. Woohoo! That was all that really happened in this book. There was like a promposal, there was some romance, but there wasn't really a plot beyond that. It was basically just a will they or won't they story when it came to the romance, and I was like, oh, okay, that wasn't really what I was looking for though. Like, I would classify this book 100% as a romance. I don't think there's really anything else going on. And while I know The Upside of Unrequited, for instance, had a lot of romance, and so did Simon, I would say that they had more of a plot than this book does. This book is basically just Leah meandering about with her friends and hanging out with them and having fun times with them and hanging out with her mom and figuring out what she should wear to prom and arguing with her mom and that sort of stuff. And it's not that those things can't be good or whatever, it's just that there was no plot to support them. If you're waiting for something dramatic or really interesting to happen in this book, I would say don't, because it's not going to. There's no inciting incident, there's no real anything that really looks like a plot, and I don't like plotless stories. I'm not saying I dislike character-driven stories, I love character-driven stories, but I like character-driven stories that also have plots. You may be saying, well, don't they go on a road trip though? Isn't that kind of a plot element? And I would say no. The road trip is really only a stepping stone in the romance, because the romance is the majority of what's going on here. Everything else is just like loose threads and then various random things that happen. So plot-wise, I would honestly give this book like a 2 out of 5 stars. The second thing I really wanted to discuss is characterization. And this is where things really went wrong in this book. The majority of the people in this book honestly felt a little bit out of character. Everybody except for Leah, I guess, who was pretty in character, and maybe Garrett, but even then we didn't see Garrett that much of the first book, so it's not like he had a big character. But everybody else just felt like they were bent just a little bit to try to make the story go where Becky Albertalli wanted it to go. So an example of this is a friendship that is purported to have existed before Simon. And here's where I'm going to cover up the spoilers a little bit. And I saw another review actually, and it's one of the more prominent ones that's been circulating about this book, and it's criticized this book a lot. I will link it down below, but it gave me the idea of referring to the love interest, like, slash other friend group character as a different name. So we're going to call her Jellyfish. Supposedly, before Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda, Leah and Jellyfish were friends. Things happened and Leah and Jellyfish stopped being friends, but supposedly this happened and they were actually good friends, and they actually had sort of like a romantic connection almost before Simon. If you've read Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda, this is not really into that ever. And I know that that book is told from Simon's perspective, so obviously it's going to be different, but I feel like they were kind of rewriting the past a little bit on this one. I didn't see that when I read Simon, and I really didn't even see it when I read this book because it just felt so random. I know that these characters had to have some kind of connection in order for the story to work, but I just don't feel like rewriting the story in order to make their connection feel more realistic was the right way to go. Not only that, but Jellyfish just felt like a very different character than Jellyfish felt like in the first book. And I'm not talking about the revelation about Jellyfish's sexuality, not even remotely. She just in personality felt different and in her interactions with Leah. Did I dislike Jellyfish? No, I thought she was a perfectly fine character, but I just felt she was slightly different from the first book. But wait, there's more. So there's another character in this book that I personally feel was out of character. And that is Jellyfish's boyfriend from the first book, and continuing with our ocean theme, We're gonna call him Male Seahorse. So Male Seahorse in the first book is totally in love with Jellyfish, like 100% loves Jellyfish. In this book, Jellyfish and Male Seahorse are somewhat on the rocks. The relationship between Male Seahorse and Jellyfish in this book seemed more flippant and more like it didn't matter than in the first book, where it felt quite important. As a result, I feel like she kind of had to write the character of Male Seahorse a bit differently in order to make him get over the breakup more quickly and to make it less important to him. I didn't love that. It's not that the relationship that did emerge in the book was necessarily bad, just I feel like they had to change things in order to make that relationship more realistic. And then I want to talk about our dear Simon. And I'm not saying Simon was totally out of character, but there were aspects of him that I felt like were a little played differently than they were in the first book. Simon's character felt very much like a meme, almost. Like the things he said seemed like memes. Like they were obviously pop culture references and things like that, but there were so many of them. They weren't all coming out of his mouth, by the way, and this is gonna tie into another issue I had with the book. But I don't know, just like his reaction to finding out that Leah's bisexual and that Jellyfish is also bisexual is, I'm shook. Like that's all he has to say is, I'm shook. I mean, he's surprised and happy for them, but then he says, I'm shook. I'm not saying you can't say that, that couldn't be his reaction, but it just seemed weird. I don't know, Simon wasn't really out of character, but that scene kind of felt weird to me, like that was his reaction. I guess it can be a reaction, but it felt like an odd one. But that's really playing into another issue I have with this book, which is that everything is too on the nose. There's so many fandom references and pop culture references in this book, and it's kind of overwhelming. To be quite honest, I find it distracting. And I think that's a very personal thing. Like, I don't think that's a criticism everyone will have of this book, but personally, it just took me out of the story whenever I would encounter things like that, and I was like, okay, I get it. These people love fandoms, and they love ships and all this stuff, but that people don't think about this literally 24/7 most of the time anyway. I don't think everyone will agree with me on this issue, and I'm sure some people thought the fandom and culture references were hilarious, but I just thought they were overwhelming and there were too many of them, and it was almost like the author was very aware of this fact. Let's talk about the relationship between Leah and Jellyfish. This relationship, I'd like to start off by saying, is great because it is two girls in a relationship, and that is something that is not seen enough in YA. It is also two girls who are bisexual in a relationship, again, something you don't see that much. So I'd like to applaud Becky, first of all, for having that in the story. However, I feel like there could have been a better character than Jellyfish to use as the love interest. Before the book came out, there was another character that I was personally rooting to be the love interest, another girl in the story, and that turned out not to be true. But I just didn't feel like they had that much chemistry. They were okay. I wasn't bedazzled by this relationship. So while I was very excited to see two girls being represented in the relationship in a book, I just feel like this pairing wasn't particularly ideal. I have to talk about the thing that I think is my biggest issue with this entire book. There are several plot issues that are brought up and not resolved. Leah, throughout the book, is very worried about what Male Seahorse will think if he finds out that she is in love with Jellyfish. If you've read Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda, you can see why this would be an issue. Leah is friends with Male Seahorse, so it would kind of create tension in their friend group, and as well, everybody expected Male Seahorse and Jellyfish to be together pretty much forever. This issue is never resolved. Even after Leah gets together with Jellyfish, they never explain how Male Seahorse reacts to this issue. Just brush that aside in favor of writing a happy ending epilogue. And this is not just like a one-liner thing. Leah is worried about this through most of the book. And they kind of just brush it aside and say, ah, well, it doesn't really matter. He's dating someone else now. Who cares? I get that that was the attempt to resolve it by having him be paired off with somebody else, but I think that was a sloppy and poor way of doing it. As well, this book kind of just brushes aside the issue of Garrett, who is a guy at their school who is pursuing Leah, and she kind of thinks she might like, but overall she's really in love with Jellyfish. It's really obvious that Garrett and Leah are not gonna end up together, but again, he's pretty much just brushed off in the epilogue by saying he got together with some other girl. There's one more thing in this book that I honestly just wish had been present and wasn't, and that is the issue of Leah coming out to Simon. Leah never actually intentionally comes out to Simon, and it's explained why she hasn't done it throughout the book, and she doesn't really quite know how to explain her reasons, and that totally makes sense, and that's totally fine. Literally no shade on Leah for not having come out to Simon yet. He ends up finding out accidentally, and while this isn't inherently a bad thing in and of itself, I personally would have liked to have seen a coming out scene between Leah and Simon. It would have been a nice callback to the first book, where Leah was upset that she wasn't the first person Simon came out to. It would have really demonstrated how close they were and how strong their friendship was, and I'm not saying that had to happen right right away, but I almost would have preferred the scene at the prom to have happened, and then we had come out to Simon without him finding out accidentally. And finally, I really just want to talk about the writing for a minute. This book has pretty average writing, I would say. And while Becky's writing has never been something I would say is mind-blowing, it's not going to win the Pulitzer, I think in her first 2 books her style really worked, and for some reason here it just didn't. Something felt very off about the writing here, a little bit immature. There was just so much dialogue, it was kind of overwhelming. And while dialogue is definitely a great way to easily convey information, it's not always the mark of a strong writer. I think she overused it here. I don't think there was a whole lot of description, and that was something that I think really did not benefit the book. Again, to each their own, whatever floats your boat. This is not going to be a situation where everyone's going to agree with me on this issue, but personally I didn't like the way that it was written for the most part. One last thing, there is a scene in here that a lot of people have commented on by now, and I'm not going to personally go into it too much because I don't necessarily think it's my place, but I noticed it when I first read it, and it's essentially that there's a conversation between Weah and Jellyfish in which Weah says that she's bisexual and Jellyfish says that she identifies as low-key bi and has recently come out to a couple members of her family as that. Weah then tells Jellyfish that low-key bi is a made-up identity and that's basically just her being bi but not wanting to admit to herself that she is. This is a scene that has bothered a lot of readers for obvious reasons. The problem with it is that it's never really called out, it's never really identified as being problematic, and in the end Jellyfish just identifies as bisexual, and it's never really clarified how she felt about what Leah said or why it was an issue, and this has really upset a lot of people. So yes, that scene is there. I want people to be aware of it. I'm not going to go on about it for obvious reasons, but yes, that scene is there. I noticed it. I didn't like it. Maybe wondering now, oh, Kathleen, what, you must have given this book like 1 star. No, actually I give it 3 stars. I didn't hate this book. Honestly, I didn't. I had a lot of issues with it, but I didn't hate it. And for me personally, a 2-star rating is a book I really didn't like. I thought it was fluffy and had its fun bits. I just thought it had a lot of issues and it really didn't have much of a plot. But it wasn't the worst book I'd ever read. If you're wondering, by the way, that is Saying Goodbye to London by Julie Burdenshaw, and that book is like a whole other level of bad. Weah on the Offbeat is nothing in comparison to that. Is Weah on the Offbeat worth the hype? I'm gonna go ahead and say no. Shocker, I know. This book might still be worth picking up if you're a fan of her other books and you want to see a relationship between 2 girls, but I just don't think it's a fantastic book overall, and I can't really recommend it. So that's it for this video. I hope you guys did enjoy it. Let me know what your thoughts are on this book. I'd love to hear that. I know there's some controversy surrounding it, but I also know there's a lot of other people who loved it, so I'd love to hear your thoughts regardless of whether you loved or hated it. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe on your way out if you're new here. I upload videos every Tuesday and Friday, occasional bonus uploads throughout the week as I please. If you'd like to follow me on any of my social medias, I will put all the links in the description, but in the meantime, I'll see you guys next time.